welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. And today, this is my my August Not So Obvious Watch Media watching. And I'm just going to cover across a couple of interesting things I've noticed in the watch media over the last, probably month or so that I've not done one of these news things, but I'm trying to catch up. So we're going to talk about the watch media today. And the first thing I need to say is, see you later, Gunzap. It was great while it lasted, and it's a shame to see you go. Who would have guessed that trying to spend enormous amounts of energy coming up with something really unique, really fun, really creative in the tiny little niche of drama between pantomime watch YouTube personalities would make even less money than indie game development? But apparently it does. So the men behind Gunzap, or the man behind Gunzap, unfortunately has hung up his spurs, said he can't afford to devote the time anymore. We are all the lesser for that. It was a fun channel, great while it lasted, and as I said, see you later, and thanks for everything you did. In his farewell video, Adrian made a little quip about welcoming him to the YouTube Watch Secret Sellout Club, and that's really the main thing I'm going to talk about today. The emergence, the existence of the absolutely not secret at all and completely tongue-in-cheek named Secret Sellout Club. But first, let's go back a little bit. I got involved, and when I say got involved, I started watching watch YouTubers probably about a little bit over 2 years ago. And back then, I would, perhaps wildly inaccurately, but if I had to sum up the YouTube community at the time, say of sort of 2017, I would say there were two giants in that community, and then a single small substrate of lesser personalities that were all hovering. You had Archie at one end with his 50-ish thousand subscribers, I think he had. You had TGV at the other end with, I think at the time, probably about 120, 130,000 subs. Then probably about 18 months ago, 20 months ago, four relatively new channels, or at least they seem new to me, started to gather real momentum and have burst free of that pack. And so they would have been Adrian at Bark and Jack, Jody at Just One More Watch, Jory at The Time Teller, and Teddy Baldassar. So they were just part of that pack of smaller people going really nowhere much. And then I look back now and we've got Jory, 76,000 odd subscribers, Adrian, 57-ish, Jody's, last time I checked, something like high 80,000s, 88,000 subs, and Teddy Baldassar just knocking it out of the park with, I'm guessing now he's probably got near as damn at 120,000 subs. So these four have just like exploded, and in some ways, in their dynamism, have put a lot of those two big ones to shame. They've got very different takes on the world. They do things all very differently. But one of the things that does bind them together is that despite the growth in their subs, they have all together joined what I think Adrian was referring to as the Secret Sellout Club, where they've had to involve other forms of media, of other forms of making income beyond simply relying on YouTube ad revenue. For those of you who don't know, YouTube ad revenue pays by the view, not by the subs, and the relationship between views and subs is not that direct. If you do any kind of analysis of how views and subs work for any YouTuber, what you'll find is that the growth of views does not match the growth of your subs. Now, this kind of makes sense if you just think about human behavior. You know, people will often see a channel, watch one or two videos they like, sub to it. A couple of months go by, they've pretty much seen everything they expect to see from someone. So they stop watching the videos, but the sub doesn't cost them anything, and there might always be something they're interested in. And so they don't unsub. And that's why you get this slow accretion of subs growing, doubling and doubling, but you don't see the views growing at the same speed. And that's not unique to these guys. That's just the way YouTube works. Look at anyone's sub versus view numbers, and that's a general trend. So what that means is, don't look at people's sub numbers and go, well, they had 10,000 subs. They've now got 100,000 subs. They must be making 10 times as much money. Doesn't work that way. And so if you are committed and if you want to keep growing the channel, that costs money. When you start to get to the kind of inputs that guys like Jody and Jory and Adrian and Teddy are making. And so where do you get that from? And in 3 of the cases, they've formed shops, which is really interesting and quite different to the YouTubers who have come before them. And I found that it's an interesting development. And whilst a lot of people would argue about, pick your side, be media or be a seller, I think my view is, if it means we have a more varied YouTube community, which so far it does mean that, if it means that we get people who form these really interesting channels and then stick to it and continue to grow, rather than sort of drop off and go get their, pay more attention to their day jobs, that's a good thing. If the downside of that is every now and then I have to listen to Jory telling me about his new watches, or Jody directing me to Joma Shop, or Adrian telling me about his straps, then who am I to complain? I'm not paying for this product any other way. I think that's a small price to pay. So personally, I like this development. I think this is actually really smart. And if, as it looks like with Teddy, it results in him having the resources to start doing some really interesting stuff, like what's being sort of teased in his trailer of this kind of real life media investigations of companies like YouTube, that's brilliant. And we should all be applauding him and everyone else who's gone out of their way to find new revenue streams to keep their channels going. So what about the other giants of YouTube, the existing giants? Nothing much seems to have changed. Looking at sub numbers and view numbers and everything is really tricky for Archie, because if you do look at his numbers, something weird has happened in the past and they're just all over the place. Or in fact, they're not all over the place. Something strange happened back in about 2016. That seems to be correcting itself over a year or so after that. But the result of that massive dislocation means any analysis of his numbers are just impossible. Ballpark, I would say, he seems to have stayed about stable in this world, and that kind of makes sense. Archie has a very solid idea of who he is. He has a very solid idea of the character he wants to play. That's great, and it served him well, except it's also that whole King of the Bogan kind of persona he's taken on is kind of niche and it's kind of limiting. So whilst it's great and the people that like him love him, I think it's also true that the people that don't like him loathe him, and it's kind of difficult for him to go. So I don't think Archie's going anywhere. I think he's got a really solid space. He's got a group of people who love what he does. That's not going to stop. What about TGV? He seems to just keep on keeping on. If you look at his numbers, they're just this inexorable rise. 200 or 300 subs every month in, month out. Curiously, the tie-up with Watchbox doesn't seem to have affected him at all. There was a little blip at around the time his views and so forth sort of go up and down a little bit, but they seem to have settled down. That was also a time when there was a lot of discussion about plagiarism and everything, so that might have affected it. But if you take a longer term view and try and smooth some of that out, it all seems fairly stable, so that doesn't seem to have affected it. Does that mean his tie-up with Watchbox was pointless? Not from Watchbox's perspective. If you look at Watchbox review subs and views, in the sort of post-April period, so the after the tie-up with TGV, there seems to have been a change. There seems to have been more people watching, more views. There seems to be more people subbing and more people viewing Watchbox reviews. Now, given that those Watchbox reviews are essentially ads, and that those Watchbox reviews have also been slightly skewing down market into TGV demographic space, I think what you're seeing is right now, whatever it was that the Govbergs were trying to achieve seems to be happening. So you might not like it, you might not like any of the people, you might not like the tie-up, you might not like TGV's history. That's great and I get it, but right now, from the little bit that we can see, it seems to be working. And the one other thing of a channel that's doing something really curious, John McManus Watch Reviews. He's experimenting with, I don't know if he's experimenting, but he's doing this like radical, extreme transparency at the moment. He's just punching out videos. He's punching out more than a video a day. He's been going for about 6 months, so what's that work out to be? 180 odd days. He's punched out like over 220 videos. His views, I don't have any clue what his sub numbers are because he's set himself to private, so Social Blade won't show any of his stats. But this is where it does get interesting. So on one hand, he's clearly hiding his stat and view numbers, but on the other hand, he's doing this kind of, as I said, radical transparency, where he's doing videos talking about what is his business strategy, what is he aiming to do, why he uses certain keywords. His most recent video had some things which really just blew my mind, where he said, people have spoken to me about the quality of my videos, but my business plan is I need to do a video a day and I don't care about quality. My business plan is I have to get a view, I have to get things out every day. That if I worry about quality, if I worry about even making a picture move on the screen, I don't have time for that. I have to just keep punching crap out. And it's like, I'm listening to this going, do you realize we're listening to you? We can hear you say these things. I'm fascinated to see where this goes. Well, it seems to be working for him. Well, he's certainly reporting that it's working for him. I'm going to be fascinated to see if John McManus can keep this going. There's actually a quote which I originally wrote, or I originally sucked up for something I'm going to talk about later in this video, talking about another podcast, where there's a theory in marketing that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And John McManus's why is because I just want views, I just want clicks, I just want ad revenue. And he's quite open about the fact that the quality doesn't really matter. So I'm fascinated to see, will he prove that truism wrong? Will he prove that people will just buy what you do and they won't care why you're doing it? The other big thing I suppose I've noticed over the last month is podcasting in general. Now, I'm a big fan of the Scottish Watchers podcasts. I've pointed people to that over and over again, and I'll continue to do so. Hilarious guys. They're so much fun. And there's also Two Broke Watch Snobs and the guys from 40 and 20, I think that is. I apologize if I got that wrong. I'll put the screenshot up. And to be honest, I'm really jealous of those things. To sit back and listen to a couple of mates having great bants about watches, and frankly, most of them talk about other things apart from watches for at least half the podcasts. It does strike me as something that would be really fun to do. On the other hand, I struggle to even keep myself to account on my own YouTube channel. So the notion that I would actually be responsible for my partner's failures or successes just causes all sorts of anxiety. So I think I'm going to be that awkward social kid that likes to just sort of hang on other people's conversations for a while. But one thing I would point out, an interesting change in the podcasting community, is a new podcast from a couple of girls out of Nashville, Tennessee, 10 and 2. So two Caitlyns, or a Kat and a Catlin. go listen to them. Not because they are girls and that it is important that we encourage more females into our community, but because they're just good at what they do. They offer some really unique insights. They look at this whole hobby from a completely different direction, and I've really enjoyed listening to a lot of the stuff that they've spoken about, like the influence of social media and how Instagram is a really important way of getting information these days. Now, personally, I don't love what they are saying. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the way that I fear platforms like Instagram allow fundamentally fairly vacuous watch companies to hide behind some glossy photos and nothing else. But my personal discomfort with the platform is kind of irrelevant. It is real. It is having real effects. It's why we have Daniel Wellington. It's why a company which, like Zodiac, which had kind of vanished, is suddenly being spoken about by everyone. It's because of social media. And so, and the girls are really plugged into that. They get that in a way I certainly don't. And so it's really interesting listening to them and picking up on that. So 10 and 2 Media, they do a brilliant podcast. I'll have a link in the show notes. Go check them out. And now my last story on the media stuff today is a very specific podcast, and it's the latest podcast that's on the Worn and Wound site, where they've gone behind the scenes with let me get this right, Vishal Tolani. Now, he's the man behind, I think it's Bradford Brands, which is part of the Solway company, and he's the man behind Spinnaker and Aviate, and as it turns out, potentially dozens, if not hundreds of other brands. Now, this is a company I've done a whole video about before. I was kind of uncomfortable about what they did, and I'd been under this misapprehension that they were themselves a micro brand, or actually that's not even true. I was under this apprehension that Aviate was a micro brand and that Spinnaker was a micro brand, and that all of these things were kind of separate, all being run by some enthusiast. And I was kind of disheartened when I found out that they were in fact all just sub-brands owned by a Hong Kong-based major manufacturer of white label goods for pretty much gun for hires in the watch community, kind of hiding behind the mystique of the enthusiast micro brand. So I was kind of put off the brands, and listening to this, I saw this interview in Worn and Wound, and I kind of came at it with trepidation. I've kind of left it with trepidation as well, but a different kind. Now the interview is really interesting because it gives an insight into, I'll call it almost the ugly side of the watch community. I mean, he runs, as I said, it's a white label gun for hire. He talks openly about how a lot of their business is making point of sale or piece of shit, $10 watches that get served on those rotating sort of sunglass things at 7-Elevens. He talks openly about designing and building and making watches that they sell at 2:30 in the morning on television shows, and he talks openly about the design process, about how you have to make these watches 45 millimeters with great big things sticking out the side of them, so that a clueless TV presenter can show things on television. It was horrifying, but also kind of thrilling, exhilarating, interesting, fascinating to listen to. But then you roll from that, and then they roll into what their brands, and really what it seemed to come down to is, it's a volatile industry making watches for other people. The watch supply chain is very difficult. In order to manage all of that, to have a kind of bass drum beat that you can control yourself of manufacture, they decided to produce some of their own brands. Aviate and a German style brand, Dufer, and Spinnaker, and a whole bunch of others. And again, this is where that comment about, it's not, people don't buy what you do, why you do it. Their why is, well, this is what we do, and it's nice to have some control over your supply chain, so bugger it, we may as well sell some of our own watches. Every now and then he would mention how it's fun and he's kind of interested in watches, but the reflexive response the reflexive return to kind of just bland product speak. You've got to, he would just constantly, it felt like you could have reached into the conversation, edited out everywhere where it said watch and insert sunglass, and it would have still made sense, would have been exactly the same thing. And so, like I said, I walked out of that. Oh, actually, one more thing I should say is when this guy, Vishal, makes the point, actually, it's almost like he'd listened to my video, and now he clearly hadn't. But it sounded like he'd listened to my video, where he said, looking back, one of the mistakes that he feels his company had made was not being transparent enough about who they were and where they were coming from. And so hearing all of this, and then particularly hearing that discussion about wishing he'd been more transparent, and then this, again, kind of like John McManus, this kind of radical transparency going down to really the parts of their business that he must know many watch enthusiasts will recoil from, was this kind of radical transparency that kind of made me warm to him. But at the end of the day, I still didn't buy the why. I still, it's like, thanks, Vishal, for telling me all this. I feel better about what you do, but I still don't connect to your brand. But that all said, that's my opinion. Might not be your opinion. It's a great interview, and he sounds like a nice guy. So I'd really suggest you go over to Worn and Wound, check out that podcast, have a listen to it, and then ask yourself some questions about what does that mean for your relationship with Aviate and Spinnaker. How do you feel about the brand? Am I being precious? Am I being some sort of snob? Or do other people feel this way? They feel a little bit kind of like they're not in a partnership with this brand who's selling them something that they care about, but rather we're simply consumers and they're picking up on the fashion. Let me know. So anyway, I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. This has been my take on some of the big things I've kind of noticed in the watch media over the last month or so. I'm going to get back into a more regular take on this, and they're going to get shorter. I promise. This one got a bit longer. It wasn't supposed to be. Anyway, wait for a little bit. You'll see a card that comes up at the end. It's got my YouTube. It's got my email address, and it's got my Instagram handle on it. Feel free to DM me. Feel free to email me. For those of you who have messaged me will know I pretty much always respond. And so far, I've really enjoyed that response. I really enjoy the community that comes. So yeah, please take advantage of that. I'd be grateful. Thanks very much. Bye.